Okay, yeah, we got the. Okay, you can start. Great, thanks.
Okay, well, I'm located in Edmonton, which is, Canada's a vast country, and different parts of their country function a little differently. We have a very large Ukrainian Canadian component in our province, and particularly where I live in the city of Edmonton. And for the most part, this diaspora here, the Ukrainian diaspora here, tends to be nationalist rather than leftist. There used to be a quite large socialist but anti-Soviet group here around Dialog, which was a journal which stood for socialism and democracy in an independent Ukraine. It was founded back in the late 70s. We had a cultural society called Romada, which eventually just ended up as a housing cooperative where I live. But most of, I would say, that kind of Ukrainian, often Trotskyist in orientation left, has gone basically over to more nationalist positions, sharing the general views of the Ukrainian community here, which is dominated by the post-World War II migration. Of the socialist groups active here, well, one is the one that seems to come into view the most for me, because it often is at the university, is Socialists Fight Back Alberta, which is a Trotskyist group, proudly calling itself communist. It is not pro-Ukrainian. It believes that this is an imperialist war in which NATO is the big imperialist power. There's also the Association of the United Ukrainian Canadians here in this town. This is an old organization, leftist organization, became pro-Soviet organization, was for many years just kind of outpost really for the Communist Party among the Ukrainian diaspora. You have to understand that most of the people who originally came to Edmonton, where I live, were miners, day laborers, domestics, poor people, and they were pretty much taken up by the socialist ideas floating around at the 1918, 1917, and many of them became members of this association, which then supported Stalinism. Now this organization is in somewhat disarray, or has been in disarray, because of the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed. But they've reconstituted themselves. There is now a socialist by the name of Alex Boykovich who heads it, but for him, it's all a NATO plot too. So I would say there's no, that I see here in town, any left-wing group that supports Ukraine. I don't know what other things I should say. Do you have any particular questions, maybe, Shimon, you would like me to address?
Maybe we can do like this, that we can go to other speakers, and then we're going to have questions, probably to you as well, maybe about also history. I think you're a historian, so
I'm a historian. That's what I'm best at.
Yes, I think there's going to be plenty of questions about history. I have some, but maybe later. So yeah, we'll leave it at that point. Okay, so thank you very much. We also invited the representatives of the group which formed recently, which is the Canadian Alliance of Socialists for Ukraine, which is also I think a little bit of an answer to John about that there is some leftists, at least, who are trying to organize in solidarity with Ukraine. I'm putting the link to the Facebook group, which is now being organized. We have at least 3 people from the group today, so I guess we didn't talk too much who's gonna be representing you, but I think all of you can say a few words about the groups. Maybe Marianne can start, or Travis, or Kevin. your choice, guys. So please.
Oh, Travis, did you want to start or?
Travis, you're muted.
I think Marianne should start because I'm interested in what she has to say regarding the East Coast. You see, we Ontarians were so isolated from all the other far parts of Canada.
Okay, yeah, do as you want, please, Marianne.
Okay, so I'm here on the West Coast. I lived in Vancouver for a lot of my life. Now I live in Victoria on the territories of the Longquagan speaking people. And the Ukrainian part of my family was the first wave, ended up in BC because the men were interned in BC internment camps. And I guess what I've noticed since the start of the full-scale invasion is that AUK Vancouver seems to have transitioned into a fairly progressive pro-Ukrainian organization. So I think it's worthwhile to connect with them. And where I live in Victoria, the local Ukrainian group is a UCC chapter, which I think mostly just seems to be a big tent of people of all perspectives in this local chapter. Yeah, I'm thankful for this for you hosting this event today. I think it may help to activate more left solidarity in Canada. I think there's an urgent need for a progressive solidarity group with Ukraine, and especially one that centers the voices of Ukrainian social movements, counters pro-Russian elements on the left, and counters right-wing Ukrainian community elements and whitewashing of right-wing figures and far-right figures. So I think this is really urgently needed. I'll just say a few other things. I think people know that there's broad support in the sort of center of the political spectrum for Ukraine, and also from the middle, the liberal, the social democratic groups, and that both the far right and the part of the left is generally pro-Russian. Here in Canada, the Green Party is small and largely divided on the issue of Ukraine. The elected representatives are quite pro-Ukraine, but other parts are very pro-Russia. Yeah, I might stop there and let other people add in more details and continue on the conversation. I think it's also good to note that in terms of far right in Canada, we have a very active far right that mobilized during COVID. I'm not sure if people were aware, there was a large movement called the Convoy, which mobilized across Canada in many cities, occupied Ottawa, the capital city, for a period of time as well. It's now mobilizing in terms of transphobia and homophobia, and that group tends to be very anti-Ukraine as well. So I think I'll stop there and let other people fill in.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Travis was one of the main organizers of this socialist group in Solidarity with Canada. So maybe, Travis, you can say a few words about that, please.
Okay, so my story sort of begins, I was living abroad in France when the invasion happened, and like I'm a pretty left-wing person, and like I had a whole thing of, I lost a lot of friends over this war who they pretty much support Russia, I'm pretty sure. And so just out of pure disgust, I felt like I needed to do something. And then I discovered you guys. I went to London to meet Christopher, and then he gave me the flag, which I really appreciate. And now that I've arrived here, I'm in university and I'm trying to gather more information within Toronto regarding like Himka, Professor Himka. He pointed out the fight back group. I wanted to point out that they're here too. They are a very aggressive cult, that they've done the amazing thing of being so unlikable that they've made the Stalinists look good, of how aggressive and propagandist, well, like they're a cult. But regarding the Association of Ukrainian Canadians, I thought, like, I discovered this group and I'm like, this seems like a group to connect with. But of course, the national leader, Glenn Medvedchuk, I can't remember his name, but he's very much in, like, he was a member of what was the Communist Party of Canada, Marxist-Leninist, which is like an old, it was a Maoist, then a Hojist style, anti-revisionist, weird group that's not really as active anymore, but like they still exist. And he's been giving, he runs the national committee of AUUC, and of course he has the campus line of, oh, we want peace. Like it's pretty strange. Like he still had, apparently he has family in Ukraine, and I think he's tried raising money or something, but like his positions aren't really in reality. And so I'm like, then I saw with the Vancouver thing, like they are a lot more independent than the national, like they have a very different position. So we have in the Toronto, there is a branch of it, but they've converted it into a museum for Shiryenko, the poet. Is that his name? I can't remember. Wait. But anyways,
Shevchenko.
Shevchenko. So I go. It was a pretty funny story. So I decide, okay, I'm going to investigate what the deal is with this place. So I go in there. It's all empty, and then I meet with the director. Is there, and like I'm like, she's like, she looks at me when I mention the name, like she's never heard anyone approach her about this. So I talk to her and I tell her, hey, I'm with this group of leftists and we have connections of like leftists within Ukraine, trade union movements. Like our goal is to, like, I guess, promote that there is a trade union movement, that like not everything Zelensky's doing is correct in protecting Ukraine. Like, of course, we need to support him defending it, but like we want, like, basically, we're leftists who support Ukraine. And she was very, I guess, like she was happy about it. She saw it like, oh, like I've been thinking just the same thing, that we need to do more stuff. But she said a weird comment like, oh, this whole thing, like it just seems like a misunderstanding between the Russian speakers and the Ukrainians. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of strange. But she seemed really enthusiastic about it. And she said, you know what, you have to talk to our leader. He's a guy named Ivan Biardi. And he's our leader. You have to talk to him. He's your age. He's all into this union stuff. I think we could really work together, that kind of thing. So I call afterwards, and he doesn't answer, so I leave a message, and I decide to look him up. And it turns out he is the leader of the communist youth wing of the Communist Party of Canada, which obviously has a very campus line. So it's like a lot of it still in this AUUC is kind of a front for the Communist Party of Canada. Like that's my impression of it. Or I guess from reading what I can about it, the closest equivalent are to this small group that's kind of dying, is like in Japan, there are Koreans who support North Korea. While it's in the AUUC case, as Jean-Paul Himke pointed out, like their North Korea just disappeared. And so they're kind of in disarray. And from what she's told me, a lot of people don't really agree with the main leader's stance on Ukraine, that like he's not really looking at the bigger picture of Russia annihilating Ukraine. So I think I might want to try to talk to them more, or see if it's worth trying to like contact a couple of them to see if there must be some people who are leftists who might be interested in helping us, but I'm not going to dwell too much on them. I think what I'm going to try to do is get involved in, like,
there's the AUC. There's another one. It's called the Canadian Ukrainian Congress, and it was created in the 50s, or I can't remember, 40s or late 40s, early 50s, after the Second World War, as a reaction to the AUC being like this Soviet-dominated Ukrainian association, and it was like created as the right-wing rival to AUC. But like, of course, it's now this really broad, large mass organization, and they have the Student Federation of Ukrainian Students, something like that. And like, I went to the festival. It's in Toronto. They have the largest Ukrainian festival in North America, and so I went to that, and I talked to some people who gave me the contact or the card of the national director. I haven't called her, but I've seen her Instagram, and it was pretty surprising to me. But at some point, she posted on Instagram like a pretty sympathetic post regarding the situation in Palestine. So my impression is the youth of this Ukrainian Congress is a lot more sympathetic to left-wing ideas or being progressive. They're not stoked in this really Cold War right-wing mentality. Like you have to be pretty progressive to be even remotely sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, in my opinion. So I feel like a lot of these people might be really worth working with if but I'm right now just waiting for, I guess, the student club for Ukraine, the Ukrainian student club, to like get organized. But the York campus, University of York University, like is sort of dominated like by campists. Like I'm in the Solidarity for Palestine. It's very obvious they don't really sympathize with Ukraine that much. Back when the invasion happened, like there's a whole controversy with the student union now, but anyways, but they did another stranger statement back when the invasion happened, more or less blaming Canada for the invasion, and barely discussing really, like, it's very obvious the student union, at least the heads, are very campist, or either that or they don't know what they're talking about, which I kind of tend to believe. But what I hope to, and then I went to that one protest with Kevin and Ostap, but and I guess the socialists were very surprised that there were left-wing people who supported Ukraine. They kind of couldn't understand it. But it's kind of funny how they still use the same propaganda script all the time. They haven't created something original. But yeah, one of my goals, I think I would have to talk to Christopher about this, and maybe like more of the higher ups of the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. I want to try, like, with this Ukraine student group, like, obviously I'm not going to go up to them and say, hey, we want to push socialism or something like that. I want to say, hey, my group's dedicated to just bringing up and showing information about the issues that Ukrainian working class, who are like the nurses and the miners, who are doing everything they can to support Ukraine while it's being invaded. Like, there are issues that need to be addressed, that need broader awareness, especially in the diaspora community, who I think could play a large influence within Ukraine itself. So my idea would be maybe for like one group meeting of this, like getting like someone from one of the trade unions on like a Zoom call or something, and them just explaining some of like the big problems they have to deal with, and obviously what we can do as Canadians and Ukrainian Canadians to raise awareness for their causes, and what we can do to help them, basically. that's obviously what I'd have to talk to Christopher about that and more the higher ups. But that's just one of my ideas of just making this group more of like an awareness campaign of just like, hey, obviously, like the whole idea, like the communist parties, the campus, they rely on the fact that people don't know about organizations like social movement. It's like, oh, they've eliminated all socialist opposition. It's a fascist state. But if you point out, no, there's socialists and who are backing from actual trade unions who represent the working class, like, and they're trying to survive against this war, like their whole narrative falls apart. And like that's why I don't think they've ever talked about social movement or tried to say, oh, it's a CIA plot or something. Like they're just too scared of it because it's such an existential threat. The idea that a kind of socialism beyond the Soviet Union could not only exist but succeed destroys their whole ideology. And so I think that's our greatest weapon, is to just bring awareness that to the campus lies, and to bring awareness that no, this socialism, being progressive, is not a hammer and sickle. It's standing with the working class. And I think that's all I can say.
Yeah. That's quite a lot actually. So
I'm sorry
thanks.
if I went too
No,
long.
no. I didn't mean that. I mean, this was actually quite an interesting, some quite interesting remarks.
I hope Kevin can talk.
Yeah, maybe Kevin can talk about the demonstration you were both together. But
Okay.
John, you want to say something more? You're raising your hand.
Just quickly, what Travis said about the AUUC, the Association of United Ukrainian Canadians. The local chapter here in Edmonton put out a manifesto on the war, calling it an imperialist war, calling for immediate peace. And they said that they have an unblemished record of anti-fascism. In the same manifesto, they mentioned they were closed down in 1940, forgetting to note that the reason they were closed down in 1940 was because they opposed Britain's and Canada's war with Nazi Germany. So there's
it's very funny. They always leave out that part. Why were you arrested?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Kevin, you want to add something to this? Especially, I saw the videos and the pictures of your small counter demonstration. So maybe you can mention something about that.
Hi. Sure. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start off just talking briefly about what brought me to this work. Like I'm not Ukrainian. I don't speak Ukrainian. My long-term partner is Polish Galician. But I've actually been protesting in Toronto since like 2010, the G20 here, Occupy. And in 2013, I was involved in protests with Greenpeace at the Russian embassy in Ottawa. There were arrests of Greenpeace activists, and it brought me into contact with some of this issue space that happened on a timeline similar to what was going on in Maidan. And I got to say, I was inspired by what I saw in Maidan in 2013. I believed, as an activist, that this was some kind of working class or economic revolt. And I was very confused when I saw leftists around me disagreeing with that position, failing to support. I was an environmental activist, so I was involved with 350.org. A 350 organizer was arrested during Maidan. It was somebody who'd organized auto Maidan protests, I believe. And I approached the organization I was volunteering for, saying, hey, can we issue a statement? One of our activists got arrested in Ukraine. And it took them, I'd say about 2 months to remove me from that organization. But there was very little sympathy and active opposition to even a baseline of solidarity with the protesters during Maidan. So there's a guy who's popped up recently in Canada. He went on a speaking tour, prominent Canadian lawyer, Dimitri Lascaris. I'm not going to talk about him in detail. I certainly can, but knowing that the meeting is recorded, knowing he's a litigious fellow, I don't want to get sued for saying anything about him, but he is one of the leading spokespeople for the campists in Canada, for the tankies in Canada, traveled on a propaganda tour to Crimea and to Moscow very recently, came back to Canada and gave a peace promoting tour. So Lascaris was on the board of this organization, 350.org, when I was removed. And so I'd always sort of felt like something went wrong there. But I went from that to getting involved in anti-pipeline campaigns, Indigenous solidarity work, WikiLeaks themed anti-pipeline data aggregation and publication. And that brought me to countering Islamophobia. Weirdly enough, there was a national security law which was introduced here, and following that bouncing ball of a law that threatened to impinge on environmental protesters with the same language used to address Islamist terror, I wound up in journalism, and that changed dramatically between 2015 and 2016 with the election of Donald Trump. Obviously, the Russiagate stuff around that caught my attention, caught the attention of every journalist in North America, I think, to some extent, whether they believed it or not. But it also brought me to contact with Trump supporting groups like Pegida, which is a far-right German-based organization with some Kremlin ties, and the Zionist far-right here as well. And ultimately, I left journalism because of criticism of Israel for the killing of a journalist in 2018. So I had all this sort of like personal activist backgrounds, and then a friend, someone I knew very well, was killed on flight PS752, the Ukrainian airline, which was shot down over Tehran in 2020, and that was the point where I started to rapidly depart from the established narratives of like campists and tankies. I think we'd had some degree of tolerance for them up until 2020. Everybody had some friends who were campists or tankies, but after losing somebody I knew personally in such a way, and seeing the evolving rhetoric around that and other things, including Ukraine, which was intensifying certainly prior to the invasion, I felt I had to do more. And so when Travis reached out, I'd been probably just I would say trolling, posting online, trolling tankies on Twitter, on Facebook for a couple months. But the opportunity to get more organized, to do more active things, stuck out as a way to fight back. And I do actually, I work professionally in academia. I get to remove. I'm not an academic, but I get to remove fight back posters and get paid for it. So it's kind of fun there. But I'm inspired as a leftist by Ukrainian Belarusian anarchists. I know that there's a media organization, Popular Front, which has done a lot of coverage of left-wing responses to fascism in Ukraine. And I think that because there's this prevailing narrative, this canard, it's offered very much in the same sense that groups like Pegida offered vilification towards Syrians or Iraqis about maybe being ISIS terrorists. I see the left falling into the same trap of describing Ukrainians as fascists or as potential fascists. And I think that if we're going to critique fascism in Ukraine, if we're going to critique nationalism in Ukraine, that there's a time and a place for doing so, but it needs to be done in solidarity with Ukrainian workers and with Ukrainian anti-fascists who exist. And I think that for me was the biggest eye-opener, is that there's these folks out there who are outnumbered, they're completely like overwhelmed by the power of the state, the power of reactionary groups, but they're still resisting. And here comes Popular Front with great coverage of that in 2017, 2018, helped set my politics right. But yeah, we did a protest here. It was just a very small protest. There were three of us, and a fourth joined. But it held up a banner, shouted and engaged with them. And my own background as an anti-fascist really has me believing that using the tools and tactics of organized anti-fascism to name and shame particularly outspoken figures like Lascaris or Ken Stone from the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, the folks with, what's the organization? World Beyond War, Code Pink. Like there's a network there, and having fought networked organizations before as an anti-fascist, taking on Pegida, we can do the same thing. It doesn't always involve no platforming, but it does involve monitoring, aggregating information, identifying individuals, finding pressure points, and rhetorical approaches that can undermine the things that they're saying in a way that builds that national understanding here in Canada that there are leftists. We have an entire political party, the New Democratic Party, which purports to be socialism adjacent. There are leftists within that space who are ardently pro-Ukraine and support the right to self-determination of the Ukrainian working class. But yeah, it was a good protest, and I really look forward to doing more. I would like to get maybe more involved in coordinated global actions. 350 actually had some very good techniques for that, banner drops or photo events. And I'm also, I mean, we've talked about this internally, but I'm also pretty keen on fundraising as a tactic. I have like a 10-year background as a professional fundraiser, but I see left-wing organizations like Yellow Peril Tactical in the US, which is, they're almost like a gun club, but of left-wing activists. They're fundraising very actively to supply frontline troops in Ukraine and left-wing units. So that's stuck out to me too as like a possible future activity, fundraising. And again, it may not be so important now that the taps are open and the money is flowing from America and Canada and the military aid. But if the political situation changes in Canada or in the United States for that matter, there may be a very real need for more active solidarity organizing in the vein of like World War II war bond drives and stuff like that. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now, and I think I'm looking forward to working with colleagues Travis and Ostap and others in the near future.
Thank you very much. Marianne, you want to add something? You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted, Kevin talked a little bit about this, but I think what we've seen is a formation or activation of basically cross-country fake peace groups that have developed a network and are hosting speakers across Canada, including Dimitri Lascaris, Tamara Lorenz, and Yves Engler. And Canada has quite a lot of like Russian propaganda folks, some really internationally known, like Aaron Mate. So I think one like important tactic might be to counter that with our own like cross-country tour of Ukrainian social movement activists, if that's possible. What I've noticed, I've mostly worked previously I mostly worked in labor movement and feminist movement, and now my activities mostly in climate justice movement. And I've noticed not necessarily anti-Ukrainian narratives in the social movements I work in, but basically a self-censoring because of the influence of the campus narratives. So folks are reluctant to come out in support of Ukraine because the campus narratives are so strong. So I think countering that with like either a speaking tour or some other way of getting information out to social movements in Canada is really important.
Okay, thanks. I see some people raising hands, but we still have probably some speakers. We also want to have speakers from Quebec. So we'll let activists from Quebec speak, and then whoever has questions or comments, raise your hands. Those who already do, keep them that way. Oh yeah, I had the info that Ronald is from Quebec, so maybe, yeah, I actually can say something about it. Ronald, please, if you want. You're muted. Okay, yeah, okay.
We thank you very much to invite us. I will do it in English, even if because it will be easier for the majority of the participants.
But we have a translation. You can speak in
yeah,
French.
but does everyone is familiar with that? No, there's no problem. Okay,
I guess yes, you can go in French.
Okay, I will go in French. Alors, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. On est quelques-uns à participer peut-être pour la première fois à une discussion avec le réseau, le RESU. Et c'est notamment, et je veux le mentionner, à travers la participation, le début de participation au réseau international pour la défense du prisonnier politique russe Boris. Et partant de notre présence dans ce réseau-là, je pense que vous avez cru bon de nous inviter et nous sommes très heureux de participer à cette discussion-là. Alors, vous avez eu un overview, un vol d'oiseau sur la situation au Canada. Au Québec, c'est une autre réalité politique, on peut dire, quand on parle du Canada, mais les tendances apparaissent comme assez semblables quand même. Hein? D'abord, il y a, je veux le mentionner, un pôle assez important organisé, campiste, qui associe la guerre en Ukraine avec une manipulation de l'OTAN. Et par exemple, ce mouvement-là qui s'appelle Mouvement québécois pour la paix, où il y a plusieurs ex-communistes qui sont à l'intérieur, on fait des manifestations toutes les semaines, des lignes de piquetage devant l'ambassade américaine à Montréal. Alors, donc, c'est un courant qui a quand même une certaine visibilité. Le grand groupe ou le groupe le plus pacifiste, entre guillemets, est plutôt sur une ligne un peu ambiguë sur la question de la négociation. Alors, ils font sur le bout des lèvres, on peut dire, ils sont en solidarité avec l'Ukraine, mais l'essentiel, ils ne font pas de travail et l'essentiel de leur ligne est de demander des négociations et un cessez-le-feu. Donc, de ce point de vue-là, ce n'est pas non plus nécessairement un levier pour faire le travail de solidarité. Il y a quelques pôles qu'on pourrait dire qui sont plus clairement alignés sur la solidarité avec l'Ukraine, des pôles qui sont plus sur des sites web d'information et d'éducation, dont Presse-toi à gauche et je ne me suis pas présenté, moi j'anime le site alter.québec, c'est-à-dire Journal des alternatives, plateforme altermondialiste. Et on est en contact avec des gens au Canada et je veux le mentionner avec Canadian Dimension qui est ici. Et je pense avec d'autres camarades aussi qui sont présents dans la discussion. Je pense qu'il y a un potentiel important et je pense que votre conférence va nous aider à faire un réseautage pan-canadien et à constituer un véritable pôle de gauche en solidarité avec l'Ukraine. Je pense que cette articulation-là entre le Canada et le Québec peut être très importante pour faire une démonstration de capacité de rayonnement pour la solidarité avec l'Ukraine dans une perspective de gauche. Là, la question, c'est qu'on a, et je pense que ça a été mentionné, les associations ukrainiennes, il y en a peut-être qui ont été dans le passé ou qui sont à gauche, mais c'est clair que c'est dominé par les courants pro-OTAN. Ça, c'est sûr, et comme le gouvernement canadien est aligné. J'ai oublié un bout dans le portrait au Québec. Le petit parti de gauche là, qui fait à peu près 15% aux élections, Québec solidaire, a une position de soutien, de reconnaissance du droit à l'autodétermination de l'Ukraine, mais a des difficultés à mettre en place un travail de solidarité sérieux. Et je pense que si on va de l'avant avec une meilleure coordination, il y aurait peut-être des possibilités de faire des liens avec des gens, avec des militants à l'intérieur de Québec solidaire. Merci.
Thank you. As Ronald said, there's some other Quebec activists, so maybe you want to add something, guys. I won't call you by names, but if any Quebec activists also want to join the...
J'espère que dans le futur, nous pouvons travailler ensemble.
Andrea, please.
So Ronald just mentioned that Canadian Dimension is here. It's not entirely true. Canadian Dimension is very divided in terms of its editorial stance. So the two people who are here from Canadian Dimension are people who have been fighting an internal battle with campism. Dimitri Lascaris, in fact, was on our editorial board, and he resigned because of the conflict. He felt we were not campist enough. So it's a very serious division, and it has absorbed a huge amount of time, and it's ongoing. And one of the ways that we combated it was that I recruited Boris to write a column for us, and he was only able to write 5 columns before he was arrested. So there is place within the platform. It's an online platform. It's for those of you who don't know Canadian Dimension, it's Canada's oldest left-wing magazine, English language left-wing magazine, founded in Winnipeg. And we are trying to maintain, the editor-in-chief is a very fair-minded and interesting person, and he's not a campist. But he's under pressure from a lot of other people, and there is room to publish alternate views. That's why we were able to publish Boris. We are looking for another columnist to write on the subject, preferably from Eastern Europe, to write from from a left-wing perspective, obviously, but not from a campus perspective. So it has really been traumatic over the last few years, trying to deal with this. But as so many people have already said, there is a very pronounced dominant tendency towards campism within the English Canadian socialist left, radical left, and it's kind of overwhelming. I'm glad to be in this group because it is also isolating. As Ronald pointed out, within Quebec, I'm actually based in Montreal, so happily among Quebec left comrades, it's less pronounced, although even some quite famous Quebec intellectuals have written some terrible articles in the press, very pro-campist, pro-Russia, and it's disheartening. So whatever we can do here to turn that tide would be very welcome. And I think it's great that people are banding together now with that in mind, and also to support, I hope, to do work to support the political prisoners in Russia, including Boris. That would be a very welcome development. So that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you very much. There's in the chat you can see Ostap wrote. I think he means Canadian organizations. So if we can have a list of the Canadian groups, if you want to write it in the chat, Martin.
Je vais parler en français, c'est plus simple pour moi et je sais qu'Adam fait un super travail de traduction. Martin Gallier, moi je suis à l'Université du Québec à Montréal, qui est historiquement l'université la plus à gauche, enfin qui a participé à toutes les grandes luttes historiques très activement. C'est l'université historiquement populaire du Québec. C'est un peu dramatique au sein de l'UQAM, puisqu'il y a 2 organisations socialistes. Les anarchistes ont un peu disparu, pour le moment en tout cas. Les 2 organisations socialistes, c'est Fight Back, donc la riposte là, dont on a parlé, qui est présente ailleurs, qui fait partie de la tendance marxiste internationale, donc réseau trotskiste a priori. Et puis le deuxième, c'est Alternative Socialiste, qui se développe, qui fait partie d'un autre réseau international socialiste association. Les deux ont des positions ultra-campistes, et c'est les 2 seules organisations socialistes présentes au sein de l'université. Donc c'est une situation terrible pour l'internationalisme au sein du mouvement universitaire québécois. Alors l'espoir, c'est qu'ils se mobilisent là pour la Palestine, mais on voit vraiment un 2 poids 2 mesures qui est un peu qui est un peu préoccupant. L'autre point préoccupant, c'est que dans mon syndicat, on est affilié à la CSN, qui est historiquement également le syndicat le plus à gauche au Québec, et qui a clairement... Alors, tout le monde condamne l'agression, mais tout le monde s'oppose aux livraisons d'armes. Donc, très concrètement, il y a des prises de position très claires en faveur des pacifistes. Donc là, j'étais au conseil central des syndicats de la CSN il y a quelques semaines, et on nous appelait à manifester en faveur justement du groupe dont tu as parlé, je crois que c'était Ronald, du groupe le mouvement québécois pour la paix, qui a des positions très campistes. Alors, juste pour terminer, le point positif, quelque part, c'est que quand on discute avec des militants de base, pas les dirigeants, mais les militants de base, on voit surtout une grande ignorance, il y a une espèce d'anti-américanisme primaire. Mais quand on leur demande, est-ce que tu sais, qu'est-ce que tu penses du droit à l'autodétermination des peuples en tant que Québécois, qui est quand même, il y a toujours eu un mouvement historiquement très fort à gauche pour l'indépendance. Et là, il y a une espèce de bafouillage qui se crée systématiquement, où on voit que les militants sont face à leurs propres contradictions et ils sont incapables de citer qui que ce soit en Ukraine, ce qui les met vraiment dans l'embarras et qui suscite évidemment une espèce de bug dans la tête qui mériterait d'être davantage creusé, parce que c'est complètement aberrant la position de la plupart des partis de gauche. Mais juste pour enchaîner sur le parti qui représente la gauche parlementaire maintenant au Québec, là, Québec solidaire, ils se sont clairement opposés aux livraisons d'armes. C'est-à-dire que c'était un soutien, enfin un de ses porte-parole, ça a clairement pris position contre les livraisons d'armes. Donc, c'était un soutien surtout en parole, mais non pas en acte. Maintenant, merci, moi je termine là-dessus, mais je pense que ça serait bien qu'on ait des contacts avec le reste du Canada pour développer cette position vraiment internationaliste. Donc, je ne sais pas comment faire, mais en tout cas, merci au réseau et à Adam et à Simon de faire vivre le réseau. Voilà.
Yes, so that's an opportunity to do this today, because if you want to exchange emails, you can do it in the private chat if you want. I think it would be useful to I don't know, guys, mute yourself, please, if you're not speaking. Yeah, it would be useful. Okay, I've already seen people raising their hands before, so I'll call on Hanna Perechoda because she was raising her hand. If anyone else wants to comment on this, that was already said, or wants to have a question, wants to ask a question, so please raise your hand again. Hanna, if you want, please go.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentations, for sharing with us the situation in Canada. I was really interested to hear it. So I would like to say that as it seems to me, our contexts, of course, they are different in different countries. I will just say that my name is Hanna. I'm a member of Socialny Ruch. So I'm Ukrainian, but I'm in Switzerland and active in Committee of Solidarity with Ukraine and with Russian anti-war activists in Switzerland that we're, which is active in the French part of Switzerland. So what I was trying to say that, of course, our contexts are different, but somehow they are also similar in a way that if we can summarize it, we could say that the center right and the center left in most of the Western countries is somehow for Ukraine till the support of Ukraine doesn't interfere with their economic interests, with interest in trading with Russia, for example. And the radical left is kind of deeply divided in all of our countries. There is a campist left, which is quite like self-centered, preoccupied with this anti-mainstream identity struggle inside the country. So for a lot of the people in the campist left, it's kind of impossible to imagine that they can agree on something with their government, because there is this anti-mainstream identity which is above all the other kinds of issues, all other issues of solidarity, etc. And also Ukrainian diaspora in our Western countries is kind of, there is old Ukrainian diaspora, which is right-wing nationalist. There is a new Ukrainian diaspora, which is kind of apolitical in most of the issue that doesn't concern Ukraine or armed weapons delivery. So my question is how you in Canada imagine, or how do you see what is your target group, and with which it is possible to have some kind of interaction and maybe to try to make a change inside of this target group. I heard about this Ukrainian, I think it's, I'm sorry, I don't remember, Travis, I think it's Travis who was speaking about the Ukrainian students who were maybe more like open to be politicized and more open to understand the broader issues and to be like, so my question is there, maybe is there any possibility to influence the Ukrainian youth? There is a lot of Ukrainian youth now immigrating to Canada. Did you have like your own impression if there are some new people coming from Ukraine going to the university? I think it could be something of interesting, because like my own experience of politicization on the left, it happened when I was already in Europe, and it's quite difficult to politicize yourself on the left being inside of Ukraine. And I think there is a lot of influence maybe we can make if we communicate with this new Ukrainian students. And another question that I have is, do you see any danger of I don't know, of a change, of a shift inside of the Canadian political establishment in terms of supporting Ukraine, in terms of weapons delivery? Do you have like same problems that now we see in the US, when this issue is very politicized, very polarized, and used by the political elites to mobilize their voters inside of a country? Is it the same thing in Canada? And the last thing I wanted to say is about the prospects of Ukrainian reconstruction, because of course we know that even during the war, the reforms and what kind of program is proposed by the Ukrainian authorities, it goes straight into the wall, like it's savage neoliberalism that will undermine the Ukrainian society from the inside. So my question is that Canada, as we see, is among the countries that already have some kind of broad consensus about supporting Ukraine inside of a society, except radical left, radical right. So if there is any possibility to move this consensus of supporting Ukraine towards making pressure on the Ukrainian authorities to implement more of a social-oriented reconstruction programs, do you see any like possibilities or instruments to do that, to influence this political establishment, so it could make pressure on the Ukrainian authorities? So sorry for these long questions. I hope.
I'm gonna try to answer.
Maybe
Travis,
sorry. I think we may, if it's okay with you guys, we usually do like that we have a round of questions or comments, and then we're gonna answer them together. It's gonna be better than answer every question separately, I think.
Okay.
I've seen Dick before, but I don't know if you still want to say something. Dick?
No, Hannah asked my question.
Okay. And there was Nina Potarska also, so if you want to go now, please.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm very outside. I just want to say hello to everyone here. I'm most I'm from Ukraine, but last month I spent in Ottawa, and I've been hosted in U Ottawa University on Human Rights Department, and thank you for all your information. And for me, it's interesting because last month I spent just trying to find Ukrainian community and in Ottawa to communicate with them. You are absolutely right. They are very pro-nationalist, and it's a very comfortable space to build this communication. And but I towards Hannah question about university, and I was on the NILIP seminar. Maybe you many of you know this seminar, and I met many students in Europe who are really progressive, and I think it's a good place and way how we can interact with them. And also now I'm again in Europe for 2 weeks because we are trying to organize discussion about with the invitation for researchers or professionals from certain areas who can help us formulate agenda about reconstruction in Ukraine, because it's the biggest problem I think which we have now, because our government absolutely in this way how they are going to live next couple of years. And all Ukrainians who I met in Ottawa during the official events, they just repeating the same statements from the government and asking money. So it's just two-way how they are acting outside of Ukraine. And there is no critical discussion, there is no discussion about how we are going to build our future and how this future how we can, if we even can see this future. So thank you, and
thank you. There was some, I think there was some problem with the connection. We didn't hear most of, but I got some of it, but the connection is very bad. Sorry for that. But I think it's on your side. Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, I have one, but I hope there are some more. I want to ask, actually, it's a question for John Polhimka, because I've seen a video in which you were reacting to that, to say more about this scandal in the Canadian Parliament. How is it perceived in Canada in general? How was it viewed in the media in Canada? Because from my perspective, I'm Polish, so there was a lot of talks in Poland about this, but in relation to election campaign, because we had an election campaign recently, and like basically it was very much connected to the fact that the ruling right-wing party wanted to show themselves as the one, trying to get all the historical features done and trying to get the Ukrainian Nazi back to Poland to get him prosecuted. So I found it really funny that this campus left and the Polish far right and the nationalist, landed in the same camp. But just all the, maybe broadly about the reactions in Canada. Was it a big topic, a big issue? Okay. Any other questions, comments now. Maybe we're gonna have some more later, but if you want to ask now, please do. If not, the questions that Hannah had were quite broad, so I think any of you could answer, anyone who wants to. Marianne, Travis was trying to say something before I stopped him at some point, sorry. So maybe Marianne and Travis, yeah, about Hannah's questions, please.
I guess, okay, so I'm just trying to remember all three of them. So the one question is like, whether a big shift in Canada could occur, what would affect weapons deliveries, something like that. So in Canada, we have a guy named Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservative Party. He is a very right-wing populist. Like, he's never held a real job other than being a politician for the Conservative Party. There used to be sort of two wings of the Conservative Party, more like a Christian Democrat kind of wing, and then obviously the more like if you know the EU, the Reformist, the Central Democrat, the normal just Conservative Democrat Union, something like that. But now they're more right wing. So he supported the before mentioned convoy. It was like this anti-vax. Basically, they wanted to hold the whole Capitol hostage until they removed all the vaccine mandates, and he supported that. Weird, like he gets a lot of talking points, like right wing, like American kind of talking points. But it's kind of strange. Like he hasn't said anything like we will cut off aid to Ukraine or whatever. He's very much avoided that from what I can tell. But like it kind of doesn't make sense to me because like, yes, he's cultivating this very right-wing, obviously not sympathetic to Ukraine kind of audience, voter base. But he's such an establishment of the Conservative Party. Like he was endorsed by our former Conservative Prime Minister, a guy named Stephen Harper, who way back, he was very much pro-NATO, I guess, to an extent, yeah, pro-Ukrainian. Like there was a meeting he had with the Russians where he said like, yeah, get out of Crimea. Like, so there's all these like conservative establishment types who I wouldn't say they're anti or like pro-Russia, they're anti-Russia or pro-Ukrainian, but they very much are pro-NATO, like, oh, we need to like defend ourselves against like anybody that threatens our interests kind of thing. So it kind of doesn't make sense to me if he were to get into power to just automatically decide, yeah, we're gonna like totally go against everything what our establishment really wants. Because like he can talk all the populist stuff he wants, how he's an outsider, but like the strangest thing is that he is the opposite of an outsider. He's so in tune with the actual echelons of the conservative establishment. So it's like, I could be wrong, but that's just my opinion. The question regarding students, like I haven't been able to meet that many Ukrainian students. Like they're still trying to get their club organized. But I do think it wouldn't surprise me if they are like more progressive, but like I think a lot of the students that come to Canada, like they're not studying stuff in humanities. They might have this idea of like, oh, business, like I'm going to get a business degree. We need entrepreneurs. That's going to fix you, like a very neoliberal mindset on how to fix Ukraine. My goal of what I want, like I've said before, is expose this part of the Ukrainian diaspora youth, that whole thing. Like the student organization I'm talking about there, I don't know if you know the Congress of Ukrainians, the World Ukrainian Congress. They have what's called the Canadian Ukrainian Congress, which is like their Canadian section, and then the student section, the student federation for that group. As I said, their national chairman put out like quite obviously it wasn't probably not enough, but it was a lot more sympathetic to Palestinians than you'd think of a right-wing Ukrainian. So obviously, these kids, they're very they're not trapped in that Cold War mindset. And I really believe if I go up to them and say, look, we're not trying to push socialism. We just want you to hear the experience of the Ukrainian working class. And we want to make sure that not only do you win this war and you kick the Russians out, but we want to make sure our guys don't try to screw with your economy, try to impose things that will later on hurt. Like, I don't think, like, these aren't, I guess, what a right winger might think are wacky socialist crazy proposals. These are very, I guess, like, these are things that I don't think any Ukrainian would disagree with. Like these are like, we got to support Ukrainian workers who are like the nurses who are like, my God, like nurses are on the front lines helping people who are getting bombed all the time, the shit they have to deal with. Like we shouldn't have to be raising money for their union or whatever that campaign was about. Like, that shouldn't even be a fucking thing. But we should bring that to the attention of the Ukrainian Canadian diaspora, or at least the kids who can maybe tell it to their parents. And then maybe, I know if you watch, if you're like, take the Turkish election, for example. Like, this is I don't know if this is going to happen. This is years down the line. But if the social movement, like in Turkey, a lot of the support for Erdogan came from, because he had such influence in the diaspora communities, they were able to help him help. Like, it wasn't totally all that, but that was a factor. Like, diaspora communities can help shape what goes on in the motherland. And what I hope years down the line is that if the network that we're creating now can at some point, maybe if social movement becomes a real party, we can sort of help spread awareness about them within Canada, who can then maybe support them within the home country. I'm trying to remember what the third question was.
About the reconstruction.
Reconstruction. So yeah, I guess that kind of also plays into it. Like, we need to say to them, like, hey, we don't want your economy sabotaged after the war. Like, we want, like, I know there's the whole proposal of like erase the debt. Like, in theory, like, I agree with the sentiment behind it, but like a lot of other Canadians might not be sympathetic, like just totally erase it. My rhetoric would be maybe not erase the debt, but we want it in a way that's manageable. We do not want things imposed on Ukraine in a predatory way. Like I'm just trying to be pragmatic about this. Like, the main issue we should drive to the Ukrainian diaspora, we want to protect your economy, like, and maybe like don't entirely trust our governments to 100% want the total best for your country. Like, you can only do that, only Ukrainians can do that, and we want to help you maintain your sovereignty, pretty much. So I guess those are my answers to those three questions.
Okay, Marianne, please.
Yeah, just briefly, in terms of target audience, I think there's a lot of progressive Ukrainian Canadian diaspora in social movements across Canada. I'm certainly familiar with a number of people. So I think that is, and just that they're not specifically working in anything to do with Ukraine solidarity. They're working in like other social movements. So I think that's a potential target audience, or people are working with the like massive task of refugee support. I think that's a possible target audience is Ukrainian diaspora who are already involved in the left, who are just not involved in Ukrainian solidarity so far. And then also in terms of Canada, the climate justice movement is very big. There's possible connections between looking at our own climate justice movement in Canada and Russian oil and gas. So I think there's a possibility with connection there. A lot of Canadian social movements are in disarray, but there is a fairly big climate movement. And then I just wanted to, like, similar to what Travis said, I think there's very soft support from Puliev in terms of arms to Ukraine. And I think a lot of his base is quite pro-Russian. So I think there's a risk in the next election if Puliev takes power that would reduce support for Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. I see Adriana raising her hands, but we'll let John speak first. I had a question, but actually I want to expand it a little bit. You're a historian, so maybe we did put some info in the newsletter which was sent as an invitation for this meeting. You can briefly say also a few words about the left history. I know it's a big topic, of course, the left history of the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, and especially what is interesting for me is that what emerged in the 70s, the new left movement in the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. Also, that would be, I think, interesting for the people who are here but are from outside of Canada. Maybe it's a topic more known in Canada. I don't know. That would be good to hear also. And then I see you, Adriana. I'll let you speak after that. So, John, please.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to briefly answer some of these questions. So one of them is will the Canadian government take a progressive stance on Reconstruction? No way. They've never done anything that would be remotely like that, even in their own country. They talk about affordable housing. They don't really do anything about it. They have been very soft on Ukrainian nationalism for many years. So I don't have any hope for the Canadian government doing anything to rebuild Ukraine in a way that will be good for its people. On the question of students, I have met here in Edmonton, particularly graduate students who are associated with left-wing groups like Commons, Spilne, with critical political critique and other groups. So there are definitely people who come over from Ukraine with left-wing perspectives. You were asking about the so-called Nazigate scandal, when the parliamentarians raised their hands and applauded for a member of the Waffen-SS, which is, I think, is not such a problem if it weren't for the fact that he was precisely being thanked for his service during the Second World War, which of course was within a group that was fighting the Soviet westward advance. So I mean, the problem in Canada is that there was originally an migration at the turn of the century, around 1900 or so, mainly to the prairie provinces, but also in the Maritimes, where there was a textile industry, wherever they could get jobs. A lot of Ukrainians came here to work in the mines. My grandfather, for instance, worked in the mines in America and in Canada. A lot of day laborers and others came originally, and they were fairly left-wing. Even the more national groups, the non-left groups of the Ukrainians, were pretty far left by comparison to the rest of the Canadians from that first immigration. After the Second World War, a lot of people fled from the Soviets, but in particular among the leadership from Western Ukraine, there were a lot of people who one way or another had been collaborating with the occupation regime. So, for example, people who were in propaganda, who wrote for the legal newspapers under the Nazis. many of them became later editors of the local papers here in Canada or in the United States. Members of course, the Waffen-SS Galizian, who had fought in those ranks. Members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, both of which were collaborators in the Holocaust and in the mass murder of Polish citizens, of ethnic Poles. So they became quite dominant. Now their children and grandchildren are the leaders of the community, and it is very difficult to dent into that community and say, really, you should have a more left-wing perspective, and you should try to get rid of those fascist trappings. That whole issue in Canada, it's very complicated. I don't want to go into it too much. But when it was a major issue in the newspapers, it lasted, I think, just over a week. And there were a lot of parties that were very interested in it. One was the opponents of the Liberals, because the Liberals in particular had this Freeland, who was of Ukrainian origin, and they were trying to link her with this whole thing. So the anti-liberal right wing was blowing the issue up. Jews were also involved because they just thought it was absolutely horrible, as one could understand, that a Nazi was being, or not a Nazi so much as a person who was in a SS unit, was being glorified by members of the community. And then, of course, there was, so this lasted quite a while until Hamas attacked Israel. And then the issue of the so-called Nazigate entirely disappeared from the Canadian press and was replaced by the stories of Israel. And there was another question you asked me, Shimon.
Just a brief, maybe it's hard to say a brief history of it, but just mention the people the new left movement in Canadian.
Okay, so that was I came to Canada in 1977 and immediately moved into that group because I had come from the United States where I was born and raised, and I had been active there in anti-war politics and also to some extent in the Black Action movement. So when I came to Canada, it was a real treat to find like-minded individuals who are also of Ukrainian origin and who held left-wing views. And already in existence when I came, and then they invited me to it once they discovered I wasn't really a Stalinist, because I had I was quite close to the Maoists for a while, I have to say. Anyways, I was invited into the group, and our slogan was for socialism and democracy and an independent Ukraine. We put out the journal Dialogue. We smuggled literature into Eastern Europe and also out of Eastern Europe. And we were quite progressive, I would say, on all issues. The only problem is when Ukraine became independent, I would say most of us, Józef Pilsudski, the leader of Poland, once said, he rode the socialist train, but he got off at the stop called independence. Well,
Yes.
That exactly describes how our group fell apart, because really we all became, to a lesser or greater extent, of course, fans of the new independent Ukraine. We were working on that. And any left-wing perspectives became sort of in the background. And I would say most of the, in the Ukrainian community, it's quite like the Jewish community. You can have progressives on all kinds of issues, climate change, on more power to the working class, etc., or for the protection of national minorities. But when it comes to Ukraine, it's like Jews with Israel. Not all Ukrainians, not all Jews, but really what's most important is the patriotism to that ancestral homeland. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Adriana?
Yeah, I think, sorry. So my background, my grandmother was Ukrainian. My mother was born in Ukraine. My aunt was born in Ukraine. I was raised by them. I was born in Brazil, weirdly. But I grew up mostly in Canada, and I concur with most of the other speakers that the Ukrainian Canadian diaspora at that point was fairly nationalist. I was struck by the fact growing up that at the time, almost all of the immigrant community, the diaspora, was from Western Ukraine. And it gave a particular view of Ukrainian, of what was going on in Ukraine. And my family was not. My grandmother was actually from central Ukraine, was in Kharkiv during the Holodomor. Growing up, I had this feeling like Ukraine was this sort of dark spot which I couldn't really reach, and what brought me in was more Maidan and a lot of my progressive friends asking me what was going on. My background has been more in human rights and then climate change. I was the climate change critic for the Green Party of Canada, and I'm pretty disappointed with what happened with the Green Party. As other people have said, it's kind of split. The official line is actually pretty good on Ukraine these days, but there is a faction that is very that is very pro-Russian, basically. But I will, my aim here is to get to amplify the voices of the Ukrainian left here in Canada, and to press for what we can do to help them. And Ukrainian reconstruction in particular, when that came up, I think that's great. That's one of the things that I would hope that we could work on. What I would want from the Ukrainian left in Ukraine is to have perhaps a list of demands of what they want reconstruction to look like. So what kind of, what should we look for? What should we press our government? What should be the constraints of what we should accept and how we should promote reconstruction? Because it does need to happen, and it's probably going to need help. But yeah, it can end up being just very predatory and unfortunate and unhappy. But the Ukrainian left could maybe articulate how to constrain it. What I think that we should do in Canada is press the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, which has a long history of defending the actions of Ukrainian partisans, many of whom I think made very unfortunate choices. And I think it's possible to say, we don't necessarily need to condemn these people, but we do need to say that whatever choices they made, these were not helpful. They certainly shouldn't be celebrated. They shouldn't be defended. That's not helpful to promoting Ukraine when you guys are busy defending the SS. And in Canada, that has blown up, but it's been a simmering problem all along. Tolerating monuments to terrible people is not something Ukrainians should be doing. And I think that there is a potential here for a diaspora that's supportive of Ukraine, saying, this is not helpful to supporting Ukraine, and maybe you can change your stance. So those are the two things that I think we can do maybe as a group in Canada.
Thank you. That was very interesting, and I was hoping for more voices of the Ukrainian Canadians. Travis, you want to say something more, please?
I wanted to add what Professor Himka was talking about with reaction to, I guess, the scandal in the parliament. I don't know if you noticed, but something sort of interesting happened when it's really disappointing that the media didn't contact you, Himka, to like explain this whole situation. What ended up happening was they got a guy, another Ukrainian Canadian professor, Ian Kaczynski. They interviewed him to sort of explain this whole history of Ukrainian nationalism and Galicia, that unit. But the thing with this guy is, I guess his whole big claim to fame and why he's sort of relevant, like from what I understand, he wrote a paper that sort of promoted a weird theory about the protests in the Euromaidan, that like, I guess there were Maidan snipers or something, that like, it was something like the right sector was really behind the murders in Maidan, or some conspiracy theory. And like, from what I understand, even one Ukrainian professor said like, yeah, there's elements of truth to this that are interesting and probably should investigate it, but this is not motivated like, but the rest of this article just seemed, and he couldn't originally, I don't think he could get it published in an actual academic journal or something. He had to do it another way, and then later I think he got it published. But like, there's a guy, Taras Kuzio, who, like, I'm gonna be honest, like, even though he's really right wing, like he supported Azerbaijan in the whole Armenia thing, and like, but like he's a pretty right wing nationalist in my opinion. But I do find myself agreeing with a lot of what he says, in the terms of that in academia there's sort of like there's a sort of tolerated maybe Russian bias within it. Even like the thing with Kaczynski is like, even though he promote like this paper, it's still used. Like when I was at that rally, these Trotskyists, these lunatics, they still talked about this paper that Kaczynski wrote, saying, "Oh, this guy's Ukrainian Canadian, and he thinks the Maidan was a coup." Like, this is like, but no one talks about him because they don't want the truth or something. So his work that paper he wrote has had quite a bit of damage in terms of the reputation of the Maidan, I think, but not a big, like, obviously you would have to be in this debate, like before the war, like only people who are interested in Ukrainian history and the whole politics around that. But I guess he is pro-Ukrainian or something. Like, even during the interview, he said something like, yeah, Canadian government needs to confront this, or else this whole issue of Nazi Ukrainians or whatever, or like people are going to be less sympathetic to Ukraine. So like, it's hard to figure out where he lies on that. But like, there's an academic community, Himka, I'm sorry, Professor Himka, like, you probably know way more about this. This is just from my perspective, from looking at it from the outside, that there's a good video by Kuzio where he goes and lists a lot of these professors who promote sort of like what he calls them as Russian technologists. I was almost like whitewashing Russia and have all these strange ties. That might be something to confront, I guess, like some of these strange pro-Russian academics. I just wanted to put that out. If Professor Himka, if you could comment on that, I was curious.
Okay, I see Marianne and I see Jean-Paul again, and we will finish at that, guys, because it's almost 2 hours. So yeah, please, Marianne and then Jean-Paul.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what Adriana said, and yeah, I mean, I think the Ukrainian Canadian diaspora does have this mess to clean up in terms of the honoring collaborators from the Second World War. And that's something that I would definitely be interested in working on as well, in terms of challenging that and having monuments taken down and commemorations taken down. So and then my second thing is just having a way for people to connect after this meeting. I think someone put that in the chat, if there's a way to collect contact information so that people can connect after this meeting.
We have all the emails. We will see which one are Canadians. We can send it out somehow, guys, so you can connect with each other. I think it's possible. That's the best option, because if you're gonna, or you can put it in the chat if someone still wants. We can collect it that way. But one way or another, we're gonna get them. So we'll sort it out. Okay, so John Paul, and I think we're gonna finish.
Okay, I just want to, because Travis asked me, I know, Shimon, that when you heard the name Kaczynski, it rings a bell for you. His real name is Ivan Kaczynovsky.
Yeah, I thought so.
And he's a real maverick in Ukrainian academia. I would say that he has pretty unique positions on some things. I have, since I'm really a historian, and since I have been writing about the nationalists during the Second World War, he's done some research on that as well, and I've found that research to be very sound, so that I don't have a very totally negative opinion of him at all. However, on this issue of his issue is that that Pravi sector, the right sector, is actually responsible for murdering the so-called Heavenly Hundred. In other words, the dozens of people who were murdered during the Maidan. I find that difficult to prove or disprove. I don't know enough about forensics. I don't know what kind of expertise Ivan Kaczynovsky has on this either. But he's quite certain this is a false flag operation. My skepticism comes from all the claimed false flag operations and conspiracies which are going around the world. So since I can't judge it, since it's a common trope of excuses, I can't say that I endorse it. I can't say that I can 100% deny it either. But my tendency is to not accept it. But I think that he has been persecuted in Ukraine. His property in Ukraine has been confiscated. He has met with a lot of resistance. He's barely hanging on there at the University of Ottawa. He doesn't have a full tenure track position. So in a case like that, you have to, I think, be sensitive to his position as somebody who's not a tenure track scholar and trying to have a different take and a unique take on Ukrainian events.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll end up at that point. It was a very interesting meeting for me. I hope for you guys as well. I learned a lot, especially I didn't know that there is a part of Canadian diaspora that is campus. that came as a surprise to me. I hope it was useful for all of you Canadians also to get to know each other and to connect. As I said, we will try to see how many of these contacts are actually Canadian, so we can circulate it and you can contact each other personally. Thank you very much for taking part in this meeting, and I really hope that some of you might be interested in what's going to be in next month. We are planning a completely different region of the world. It's going to be a region of Caucasus, so also an interesting topic in terms of solidarity with Ukraine, I guess. And that I think it's quite. We thought that at some point when we started this meeting, it's going to be quite complicated to get people from different regions like Africa or Middle East. But we actually, every time we try, we actually get people from this progressive milieu that are willing to take part in it and say a few words about the Ukrainian solidarity. So I hope the next region is going to be also represented quite well. We have all your emails, so if you're okay with that, we're going to send the future newsletters for you guys. We are not spamming really. It's just just 1 month. Every month, we're just going to mention that we have a meeting. If anyone wants to take part in it, you're more than welcome to come. Thanks again for all of our speakers, for all the people from the audience who wanted to take part in the discussion, especially the people from Canada and Ukrainian Canadian diaspora. And many thanks to Adam. A lot of work for like a lot of time to speak and to write all the interpretation we had. So thanks again, and hopefully see you, some of you at least, next month. Thank you very much again.
Slava Ukraini.
Okay.